What advertising has always wanted to do is not simply to suffuse the atmosphere, but to become the atmosphere. It wants us not to be able to find a way outside of the world that it creates for us.
It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
That goes straight back in American history. You read the working class press in the mid-19th century, press published by artisans and what were called factory girls, young women from the farms working in the textile mills in eastern Massachusetts, which was the center of beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Their press was calling for, they said their theme was that those who work in the mills ought to own them. Wage labor, which was called wage slavery, was regarded by most Americans as not very different from slavery. Even the Republican Party regarded wage labor as just at best a preliminary to free labor, but intolerable because it's a kind of servitude. A large part of the northern population fighting the Civil War was fighting under that banner.
Last fall, while some people went shopping for new sweaters, the people of Peterborough went shopping for a new energy company.
Deregulation is giving the people the ability to choose.
I think that the town made a really good choice.
With Enron, we've seen energy rates cut between 15 and 18%.
You don't even know that there's a difference until you get your bill.
Nobody likes a monopoly, particularly in a place where the state motto is live free or die.
You can choose your neighbors, and soon you may choose your energy company. Enron.
I know I need to listen.
No one has imported the techniques and philosophy of market research into politics more successfully than Frank Luntz. His clients have been some of the most prominent Republican politicians of the last decade. There was the mayoral campaign for Rudolph Giuliani in 1993, his work for Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, and especially his collaboration with Newt Gingrich on the famous Contract with America, the document that ushered in the Republican Revolution in Congress.
If an electricity company stood up and said, we want to do it for your benefit, we want to do it for our benefit, we want to do it for everyone's benefit, and so we have a better approach.
Tonight, Luntz's client is not a candidate, but a Florida utility wanting to build public support for a change in how it's regulated on the environment.
I know that the public is very down on corporate America in general, and they're down on power companies. So what is the language? What is the information? What are the facts? What are the figures that would get Americans to say, you know what, my electricity company, it's okay?
On one hand, you have wind, which has no fossil fuels associated with it.
To get at his subjects' gut feelings, Luntz has them register their moment-by-moment responses to a speech by a power company executive.
Climbing, changing fuels.
But watching Luntz work, I couldn't help wondering, do the words he's found help the public see the issue more clearly, or do they disguise it? Is Luntz listening to us so his clients can give us what we want, or so we can figure out how to make us want what they have to sell?
The words work. The words apply to the policy. This is how we're going to sell it. And I'll be able to walk to this electricity company on Monday and be able to say to them, your policy makes sense, and here's the language to explain it. That was the eureka moment. When I watched people nod their heads, I watched them look to each other, and they were willing at this point to fight for this position. You're replacing the bad with the good. It's almost like in with
This is a guy who is merchandising ideas and merchandising a movement and merchandising a political party. And in many instances, the words that he says are the ones that resonate, are ones that obscure to some extent the issue.
Take the so-called death tax. When it was called the estate tax, most people supported it. But Luntz managed to turn public opinion against it simply by giving it an emotionally loaded new name.
For years, political people and lawyers, who, by the way, are the worst communicators, used the phrase estate tax. And for years, they couldn't eliminate it, but the public wouldn't support it because the word estate sounds wealthy. Someone like me comes around and realizes that it's not an estate tax, it's a death tax, because you're taxed at death. And suddenly, something that isn't viable achieves the support of 75% of the American people. It's the same tax, but nobody really knows what an estate is. But they certainly know what it means to be taxed when you die. I'd argue that is a clarification. That's not an obfuscation.
Luntz has admonished Republican politicians to talk about tax relief instead of tax cuts, and to replace the war in Iraq with the war on terror. He once told his party to speak of climate change, not global warming.
What is the difference? It is climate change. Some people call it global warming, some people call it climate change. What is the difference?
It apparently made enough difference to Republicans that they began to use climate change almost exclusively.
It caused climate change.
The President's Global Climate Change Initiative.
Climate change research.
And we must address the issue of global climate change.
You should look at public opinion polls for the same reason that they are taken. Well, why do we have so many public opinion polls in the United States? They're mostly business initiated. The propaganda institutions, like the PR industry, they want to keep their finger on the public pulse. They got to know how to design the propaganda. So they want to know what people are thinking. So, in fact, if you want to find out, you can find out too. And you can find out how these opinions are changed.
The most effective kind of propaganda was defined as the kind where the subject moves in the direction you desire for reasons which he believes to be his own.
What really matters is the fact that the major institutions in the society are under totalitarian control. After all, what's a corporation? You know, a corporation is just a tyrannical system, one of the most tyrannical systems that humans have ever devised. They've been given extraordinary rights by the courts, not by legislation, early in this century. They're, like the multilateral agreement would give them actually the rights of states. They're basically unaccountable to the public. When they've been given the rights of persons, that means, for example, they have the right to propagandize. So, like, they've been given the rights of free speech, which is insane. You know, these are collectivist institutions. They've been given the right to advertise, in fact, at your expense. So you get the tax-free. So you pay for the privilege of having your minds destroyed, they own the information system. I mean, they control the information system. What are the media? You know, huge corporations, parts of bigger corporations. That sets the framework of discussion. The major decisions that affect what happens in the economy and social life are made behind closed doors. Very little public accountability. They have the right of freedom from search and seizure. You know, Fourth Amendment rights means you can't know anything about what they're doing. You know, and they have enormous power. Furthermore, I mean, it's described as free trade. It's ridiculous. I mean, these are secret institutions, so all figures have to be taken with a big grain of salt because nobody really knows. But the guesses are that, by international economists, that maybe 40% or so of U.S. trade is actually internal to corporations, meaning it's not trade at all. You know, it's just moving something across a border. It's no more trade than moving from Indiana to Illinois or something like that. Happens across a border, you know, to get cheaper labor, to avoid environmental restrictions and so on. Well, you know, 40% is not a small number. And that's a vast underestimate because there are also complicated strategic alliances among alleged competitors. So IBM and Toshiba and Siemens and so on are working together. You know, they're working together on design, on marketing, and so on. And in fact, it's gotten to the point where some international economists call it a new system of what they call alliance capitalism. You know, big networks of tyrannical institutions basically running the world. I mean, in comparison with this, the difference between, you know, everybody voting and everybody not voting is pretty trivial.
In the Reagan administration, you really had a massive enterprise to control the public mind. In fact, when this was exposed during the Iran-Contra hearings, partially exposed, one high administration official described it as the most successful operation they carried out. He said it's the kind of operation that you carry out in enemy territory. And that expresses the attitude toward the population completely. The population is the enemy, and you've got to control enemy territory, and the way you do it is by very extensive public diplomacy, meaning propaganda.
Intelligent propaganda is not a propaganda that tells blatant lies. It's something where you try to show the good side of what you're supporting, and you don't tell about the negatives. You only tell about the positives, which is true, but it's only a half-truth. And then it makes it a half-lie, if you will.
It is told in the words and from the perspective of the power wielders, and with no view from outside the walls. And that's really, I think, in a nutshell, the problem with so much of the coverage in Washington, is that the habits of mind that inform it, the sympathies that inform it, are all with the people at the top, and not with the people outside the palace.
The biggest joke, I think, in Washington is the idea that the press has an adversarial relationship to the city it covers and to the class of politicians and bureaucrats that it covers, when in fact it is so far from their adversary, it's a component of their life. It's a vicarious member of the same club. The adversarial definition is part of the self-flattery, the self-adoration with which the press conceives of its role and justifies its role to the public, who, of course, would like to think that there was a watchdog instead of a lapdog in Washington. They aren't so lucky.
Inside the club, it's getting hard to tell anymore who's the reporter and who's the politician. These days, they sometimes just spin together in Washington's revolving door.
I used to worry about blurred lines. Now the lines, they're not even blurred. They're gone. The lines are gone. I mean, people pop in and out of administrations all the time. Jim Fallows, speechwriter for Jimmy Carter, then national correspondent for The Atlantic. I mean, it just, I didn't like it at first, but it's a phenomenon of our time, of the 80s and 90s, that people are going to work in politics and go into journalism, and they're going to pop back and forth.
No, I don't think Bob Dole's a mean person. I think he's an undisciplined person. And
the most notorious case of media cross-dressing involved ABC commentator George Will.
George Will helped to prep Ronald Reagan for a presidential debate with papers that had been stolen in a black propaganda operation from Jimmy Carter's campaign. Having helped in that obscene prep, he then went on the air as an objective commentator later that night to say that he thought Reagan, viewing it objectively, dispassionately, fair-mindedly, even-handedly, and so on, had done best in the debate, rating the horse that he'd been secretly training. Paid no price for it.
More than anyone, political analyst David Gergen seems stuck in the revolving door.
Bob, you decided to call this book The Choice that voters must make this November.
After working for Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, Gergen began writing for U.S. News and World Report and appearing on McNeil Lehrer. Then he returned to politics as a Clinton advisor, and now he's back in the media.
When you click on that set, you sort of have to say, what to yourself? Am I seeing David Gergen, the thoughtful journalist, as he sometimes is, or am I seeing a guy who fairly recently was in the employ of Bill Clinton as a paid propagandist? Sometimes even I find the lines too blurry to follow the action.
Through propaganda, we can derogate our opponents and dehumanize them. You know, we didn't refer to Germans, we referred to Huns. We didn't refer to Italians, we referred to, as you know, we didn't refer to Vietnamese, we referred to Gooks. So Huns and Wops and Gooks and Japs were the short circuit that we would take to dehumanize our adversaries and to reduce them to a sub level.
The time, the middle of the 19th century. The place, the American West. The Armed Forces Screen Magazine presents The covered wagon, backbone of the Western trek, didn't stand a chance when it was traveling alone through hostile country. When attack came, the covered wagon could protect itself only if it banded together with other wagons. This was mutual defense. This was mutual security. We as a nation are able to live a peaceful life, but hanging over us all is the specter of a haunting and horrible fear.
The medium weight force is clearly the force of the future. It's a cavalry type force, and clearly the Indians are out there. That's politically incorrect, but we're dealing with cavalry and Indians again, and the cavalry is what we need.
In order to stop saboteurs armed with atomic explosives, we could search all planes and trains and boats and automobiles crossing our borders from now on. We could open every single package. We could remain on a constant 24-hour, day in, day out alert.
Man muss nämlich gut regieren und für eine gute Regierung auch eine gute Propaganda betreiben. Das eine gehört zum anderen. Eine gute Regierung ohne Propaganda kann ebenso wenig bestehen wie eine gute Propaganda ohne eine gute Regierung.
I was raised in a milieu where I was taught that communism leads to dictatorship and that capitalism leads to democracy. But it's not that simple.
The essence of a politician, of the political animal, is the pursuit of power.
You can say what you want about this country, and I love this place. I love the freedoms we used to have. I love it. I love that.
So what do they get when they are elected to office? They get power, not money, power.
Free market capitalism definitely democratizes a country and a culture. But corporate crony capitalism of the kind we're seeing with this White House is as antithetical to democracy in America as it is in Nigeria.
Power of concentrated wealth shall not be abused.
Americans have to understand the difference between free market capitalism, which benefits our country, and this kind of corporate crony capitalism where we have large corporations running our government, and there's a name for that, and the name is fascism.
And we know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob.
A need to dominate, a need to control, and again, above all, a need to dominate.
The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything.
Big Brother is watching you and the little people.
Obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money.
It's not a conspiracy.
And what he found was no criminal conspiracy.
It can't really be a conspiracy.
There's no conspiracy?
No conspiracy.
Everyone is saying the exact same thing on the exact same day. It's almost as if there was some kind of, I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for? Some sort of larger plan.
A need to control, a need to dominate, which is what leads people into politics.
The temptation to use public power and play God is almost irresistible.
I am Oz, the great and powerful.
As of now, I am in control here.
To the corrupt, thieving, politicians of America.
We're not going to transform our fine FBI into a Gestapo secret.
And Franklin Roosevelt said that. He said fascism is the control of government by large corporations for their own benefit. And and I close with this, I have an American Heritage Dictionary, the last edition, which I keep at home, which says, it defines fascism as the control of government by large corporations with right-wing ideology driven by bellicose nationalism. If that sounds familiar to a lot of you.
Decisions are made on bases other than what is best for the country and what is best for the ordinary people in this country. They have other motives, other drives, other wants, other needs, and they exercise them.
I'm reminded of Tocqueville's remark is when tyranny comes to the United States, he said it will be very, very quiet, and there'll be the sleep that comes over the somnolence that comes over quiet, pacific industrial animals, comparing us to sheep out in the meadow.
We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, Jr. We were taught that our armies were always invincible and our causes were always just.
Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon, they all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam!
While survival of the fittest may be a good working description of the process of evolution, a government of humans should elevate itself to a higher order.
We apply social values, more noble than mere monetary profit.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care.
The note is that we have dumbed the public down to the point where I think most people don't realize what they're missing. They don't know what's out there.
The great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
This is not a message of happiness or reassurance, but it is the truth, and it is a warning.